Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Transportation Society of Engineers Ireland. Today, we are graced by the presence of Andy Burns from AECOM, who will talk to us about the improving delivery of active travel in Northern Ireland. This is a topic I think that should be really interesting because and it's worth knowing about. And we're also joined by Peter McParland from the Department of Infrastructure in Northern Ireland, who will help out on some of the Q&A right at the end. So feel free to listen attentively and ask any questions that you want to put in the Q&A session in the bottom. But in the meantime, I'll hand over to Andy to tell us everything about delivery of active travel in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that really warm welcome, and thanks for everyone for joining in today. As you said, my name's Andy Burns. I'm Associate Director in the Belfast Streets team in AECOM, and my role over the last 18 months has been having the privilege to lead the Active Travel Support Office in Northern Ireland, alongside Peter, the Director of Active Travel in the Department for Infrastructure. So there's an hour in for this session. I'm hoping the presentation will take around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for some good Q&A at the end. Peter isn't presenting alongside with me, but he's kindly offered to answer any questions at the end, so we'll field those as they come in. In terms of a bit of an agenda, I wanted to sort of break this up. I appreciate we are talking about active travel in Northern Ireland, so I'll spend sort of the first three slides talking about where we've came from before the Active Travel Support Office got involved with the department. Then talk about the middle section, sort of about the immediate insights from the ATSO and some of the work we've been doing, really around the engagement framework and some of the clear, consistent messaging that we wanted to put out there to the public, and quite an exciting piece on route appraisal. We'll do a live demonstration of the tool. Hopefully that works okay. And then I'll sort of bookend the end of the presentation talking about the future, what we think we need to do heading into the future, because everything will look and sound great that we're doing now, but there's always the next challenge that we need to get to. Starting at the start, I think this is important just to understand the context of what DFI's remit is. So DFI are sort of the sole transport authority across the whole of Northern Ireland. So the active travel remit extends out to roughly 2 million people within the country. Northern Ireland's quite unique in its geography, and a lot of the population are condensed around Belfast, sort of South Antrim, North Down. And as you go further west, it becomes more urban. In terms of DFI's remit, it's a challenge, and they have to be seen to be welcoming to everyone effectively when it comes to active travel. And anyone out west has exactly the same remit to put a question across to understand why you're doing active travel in their village as to someone in Belfast. It's really important to understand that sort of remit when we talk about the plans that the department have put in place to try and make sure that their active travel plans apply to everyone in the country, not just those areas with the high populations. Some of the other things that DFI are responsible as well in there, sort of the messaging around active traveling. So they've got a good behavioural change program that I'll talk about slightly, and it isn't all just about building the infrastructure. Moving on to a little bit about strategy to delivery. So what this slide tries to do is tell us where we came from and where we are now. So starting in 2015 and then in 2026. So in 2015, the then Minister of Regional Development introduced or issued the bicycle strategy for Northern Ireland, and that sort of set out the plan where we wanted to get to over the next 10, 15 years in the province. And that was really structured around three key pillars. That was build, support, and promote. The build's obvious in terms of what we want to do there, but support and promote sort of talks around those behavioural change initiatives that the department looked to roll out. And I think it's fair to say that there's been a really successful behavioural change piece that has been ongoing now with partners such as the what we've cited with us for a number of years now, and that continues at pace. In 2016, then the exercises in Explore and Enjoy strategic plan for Greenways came out. That was quite unique at the time in terms of a plan for Greenways. It was effectively framed around the disused rail network in Northern Ireland. And that was structured in a way that it was council led. So what I neglected to mention in the first slide is that delivery of active travel is generally from the department centrally. They have their divisional teams, but unlike Ireland, there aren't the local authorities that support that. We do have the councils that lead the Greenways plan, with the department funding a proportionate amount of those Greenway proposals. And I think it's fair to say there has been some successes, but there's also lessons learned there. That's a separate part that the ATSO we're looking at that I won't talk to today, but there's work ongoing there as well. 2021, then the Belfast Plan effectively came out, what I'll probably refer to as the BCN as I moved through the program, and that effectively determined short, medium, and long term networks for cycling around the core of Belfast and the Greater Belfast metropolitan area. But the key thing for this slide is really to talk about the part on the right hand side. There's the Climate Change Act in 2022. Now, nowhere else really has this type of mandate where Climate Change Act effectively says that a minimum 10% of your transport budget needs to be spent on active travel. And that was the real galvanization, the real point that we could accelerate then how we try to deliver active travel in Northern Ireland. And just to give you a bit of a context about where we are there, current transport budget sits around 700 to 800 million, so 10% of that's 70 to 80 million. So there's a real needing to sort of ramp up delivery and understand what the delivery plans were in terms of how we would deliver these targets going forward. And that leads us into 2024, late 2024, when the active travel delivery plan went out for consultation. This happened just basically at the same time that the active travel support office came into commission. And the active travel delivery plan is ambitious in that it looks at sort of shorter everyday journeys, but around 42 towns and villages within the country. So that went out for consultation. We now moved into a period towards 2026 where we've been embedded with the client since late 2024. And really, one of the key things we were asked to do initially was look at the prioritization within that plan and just decide then where we would start to target schemes going forward. But even as we were doing that, there were already things that the department prior to the active travel support office were looking at in terms of trying to set up for strong delivery going forward. These were really the three key pillars. So the department set out to improve the delivery capability prior to um, early 2024, I think. They had one delivery partner that was supplying into their internal design consultancy services team. They've expanded that to two, so they have the ability when we move into the detailed design, they have more resource there to deliver that. Pillar two is really more about the ATSO. So the Active Travel Support Office was set up, as I said, at the end of 2024. And that came from consultation that DFI had with the NTA, where they talked about the successes of things like the Cycle Design Office, and how that really helped them just springboard into a new layer of delivery. So off of the back of that became the Active Travel Support Office. And then pillar three, sort of right, what I really want to talk about today is that building of public and political support. So one of the first things when I spoke to Peter when I came in was around, what can we do better in the active travel space? And I've had the privilege of working in that space over the last 10 or so years. I think the industry itself has got into a position where technically we're really good, but I think there still is a question mark there as to whether we're good enough from the public perspective. Still think we're a little bit reactive when we can be proactive. Peter always frames this as winning hearts and minds, and it sort of lit a spark within me as to like what can we do? We're at the stage where we're trying to springboard this. We have the plans. What can we do to promote consistency in and around the messaging of these schemes? So this is where I move on to sort of the ATSO and our thoughts. So as I said, when we came in principally, there was the active travel delivery plan that just went out for public consultation. And one of the first things we were asked to do was look at the routes that were already prioritized in that and try to come up with a robust and defendable route appraisal framework. But owing to that last conversation about the public engagement piece, there was a conversation there that happened naturally between ourselves and the client in terms of, well, how do we frame that? If we want things to be easily understood, then that should apply to our route appraisal as well. And we also seen the opportunity for the Belfast Cycle Network to potentially come under that same sort of messaging as well. Now, it is important to say here that the Belfast Cycling Network, there is work going ongoing aside the Belfast Cycling Network plans that sits at the minute. There are transport plans that are being pushed forward that ultimately look at all different types of modes, not just active travel. I think it's fair to say that in the near future, the short, medium, and long term schemes for the Belfast Cycling Network are likely to be replaced by the Eastern Transport Plan. So the prioritization piece of that is already sort of done, but then the engagement piece can sit quite nicely in between that. And not to be forgotten about, of course, is the strategic plan for greenways that sits to the side. Some of the messaging can still move across into that, but as I said earlier, it's a council-led program, but part funded by DFI. So this slide, what we try to do here is just outline sort of the public facing and the technical elements. So what is the engagement framework? So we've framed it around this sort of framework of people, places, and provision. So how many people, when we're doing a scheme, are we saying is going to benefit? Where are the places we're taking them to? And how are we getting them there? Now, the technical side of the road appraisal sort of sits within the provision bracket, but people and places is really important, I think, when you're trying to tell people why you're doing these schemes. Um, so what you're seeing in the bottom left picture there is effectively something called a track analysis. So we've done a bit of a survey internally within the non-cyclists and DFI, and we're asking them questions that if we came to your town, this particular route we're looking at here is Granshire Road and Bangor. If we came to your town and we said we were going to build this red route, how far would you be prepared to cycle on your bike to get to an access point anywhere along that red route? We consistently kept coming up with this number of about 3 minutes. We took that 3 minutes and we applied it to a walking AECOM, which is what the yellow sort of highlight on that map is showing there. So a 3 minute cycle and a 9 minute walk are very similar in terms of distance. And that allowed us then to look at things like the census data and figure out, well, here's how many people on this particular route, it's 5,000 plus, that could potentially benefit from this network. Similar to places, we were asking the questions of, well, what places do we want to go to? The active travel delivery plan was an Atkins-led piece with AECOM feeding in, and the three key tenants in that piece was the proximity to town centres, the proximity to transport hubs, and the proximity to schools. So I think that was a really good base. And we've expanded that slightly to include recreational areas, so sports clubs, and a nod to linkage to active travel facilities. So that increases as the active travel network starts to expand. And then provision is the one we sort of look at the technical feasibility. And again, the intention of the route appraisal plan is to give us a high level indication of which routes would stand up as potential good corridors to go and look and put an intervention onto. There's more analysis that's done after the fact that I'll talk to later. But provision talks about things like road space, how many junctions you have along a road, how many side roads you're interfacing with. Do you need structures? What's the gradient like? Various bits and pieces that I'll show you more on later. But at the very start of this, to go back to the original last, to look at the prioritization, what we had was our team within the Active Travel Support Office effectively mining this data. They had all the data sets and they were mining it, and it was a manual process. And we ended up prioritizing 90 plus routes and scoring them against each other, and that's about 160 kilometers within the country. And that was all with the idea that the route appraisal would be easily explained in a public facing document for why the benefits could translate to why have you picked this particular scheme? Why is it robust and why is it defensible? So one of the things before I get to move on to talk about some of that stuff, we wanted to look at the same time was on the right hand side there you have the draft ATTP as it sat, and on the left hand side here you have what's called the propensity to cycle tool for Northern Ireland. We were aware that Robin Lovelace and the University of Leeds, their Institute for Transport Studies, has a propensity to cycle tool for England and Wales. So Peter was happy for us to approach Robin and have the discussion about doing similar for Northern Ireland. And really, we wanted to do that to see what the propensity to cycle tool would look like aside the draft ATTP. And essentially, what Robin's tool does is tell you where there's areas for potential for cycling within the province. And as you can see there, that exercise was worthwhile because it gave us an idea and a bit of confidence that actually what the draft ATTP was showing matched where there was the potential for cycling or cycling potential. That was quite nice to see that tied together and a worthwhile piece of work. But the other thing that we got through that work was that Robin works with a colleague called Dustin Carlino. Dustin is an ex-Google employee that has set up separately a company called AB Street. And through that liaison, Dustin was showing us a network planning tool that he'd done for Transport Scotland. So there was a bit of an idea there of, well, okay, we're doing this manual route appraisal in the background, which is spreadsheets and laborious and honestly can have the potential for human error to come in. So why don't we talk to Dustin about potentially trying to digitize this? So that's what we did. We've ended up in this position where we have this root appraisal tool, and this is where I might just unshare here and see if I can change my screen. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of a quick whistle stop tour of what this does. So effectively, what you're seeing here is obviously Northern Ireland, and these lines that are shown are the active travel delivery plan. So you have your high priority future existing and existing with potential for future enhancements. If you hide that, this tool can do things like show the local authority boundaries. So that's the councils I spoke about earlier that the department works in partnership with to deliver the greenways. And then there's the divisional boundaries at the bottom, which are the north, south, east, and west delivery teams within the department that are responsible for owning these active travel schemes once they get briefed out from the central department there. If I just turn the ATTV back on, what you can see here is that there's various things. You've got your people, places, and provision score, which is effectively the way we've looked to prioritize these. They score by different colors. You've got your unweighted score, which is the sub criteria that sits below before it's weighted. You can then look at particular criteria. So let's say you want to look at the accessibility of the route, which talks about gradient. You can have a look how that scores. And you can also look at population per kilometre, which is quite useful when it comes to looking at things like cost per capita these schemes might cost. If I just go back to the layer and the Grancher Road scheme that I talked on earlier, I'll zoom down into that. Um, click in. This is Bangor, this is Grancher Road. If I click into this, what you'll see is this panel on the left-hand side opens up and it tells you various information about that particular scheme. You've got things like the length, you've got the PPP score, so this one's scored 9 out of 9. So in terms of prioritization, this is a really good scheme that we think should be taken forward. You do have a cost in there, and I'm keen to stress that the cost doesn't actually form part of the decision making at this stage. It's more there for an indicative nature. So we've established what we think are indicative costs for either a walk, wheeling, and cycling corridor or a walking and wheeling corridor. And what that does alongside the track analysis or the track data, the census data that tells you how many people can access a route, figures out a potential cost per capita so that we have at least something in terms of a test between is a route more beneficial on cost than another. But there's a separate process in terms of business cases and stuff that we go through to just bottom that out. As I scroll on down, what you have then is effectively our route appraisal. So you have the criteria that sit within their buckets. So you've got people, you've got places that I talked about earlier that talk about how many facilities are in proximity to the route, how many people can link into them, and then you have your provision. So that's the things I was talking about earlier about the accessibility of the route, walking and cycling through roundabouts, etc., etc. The really interesting one is the space for walking, wheeling, and cycling. The document that the department have decided to go ahead with in Northern Ireland is cycling by design. So that has parameters within it that tell you how much of a buffer width you need between your cycle facilities. That effectively tells you based on speed limits what space you need. So that has been quite interesting in terms of the piece of software that started as an AECOM internal piece of software called Route Insight that takes OS mapping data, looks at where the boundary layers are and sees what you can fit in and gives you this RAG rating effectively, this red, amber, green rating that tells you what will fit within a particular cross section. You can scroll up to the top, you can hit print report that gives you a nice printable page with all that information in it. So you can imagine how this information is very useful when it comes to public consultation. It's information that we want to make sure is consistent from inception the whole way through the project because these schemes will step through different work teams, different consultants, different people. We want to make sure that information is accessible. At the minute, the tool's sitting in beta. It's also only internal at this stage, but we're happy to show it because we think it's a really good piece of software. The other piece I'll just touch upon before I finish up is you can actually edit new routes in here. If you go into the work stream and say, for instance, we want to go into Antrim and Newton Abbey, we've split it by council areas because it becomes a little bit more resource intense and you're trying to draw these new things. Say I want to draw a new route down in White Abbey, say on Station Road. Click to draw your new route, you give it a reference, so route 001, you point, you click, it drags along, snaps the existing road network. If you want to do an extension, you can. If you want to take it into one of the side roads, you can. You hit finish, you click on it, and again, you get all that information out that tells you from a very early stage, like, do we think this is potentially a good route? Where this has really helped is if some of the active travel delivery plans have tweaked slightly, or we think there might be a better alignment alongside a parallel road, we're able to very quickly go in and have a look and see how that might affect things. So I think it's quite an impressive tool that we've built there, and it certainly helps us with some of the stuff we're doing in terms of prioritization. So moving on, and this is where I want to talk about the engagement framework. So I've called this foundations for future success, but effectively that information that I've just shown, what you're seeing on the left-hand side is something that we're calling a scheme pressy. This talks to the public engagement piece where we think we can try and maybe get ahead of some of the schemes here with this type of document. So if anyone isn't unaware of what a pressy is, it's effectively, in report terms, it would be something that would like an executive summary, would pick out the key points of why you're doing something or what's within a report. That's really what we wanted to do with this, the what, where, why, and how of any particular route. For every single route that's coming out of the active travel delivery plan, and we're trying to pull this into the Belfast Cycle Network as well, we have one of these route presses. That first page tells you what we're doing. The second page tells you where you're doing. You've got a map that shows you where the route is. It shows you the key points that we're connected into, the key facilities, the key trip attractors, why this is a good thing for the public. The why then, you'll have to squint to read that, but effectively that's a sanitized version of the route analysis. So at least there's a comparator between each of the routes. So it talks about things like accessibility of the route, that talks to gradient. So we can highlight just how each of the routes compares to each other. And then we do the how, which is also a representative cross sections just to help people visualize how the street might feel like. But beside that, we also have a more technical pack on the right-hand side. So that's something that we're called the engineering packs. And again, for every single scheme that we're bringing through, there's an engineering pack that supports this. And effectively, I know this is Newcastle, but I've used the Grancher Road example. We look at a corridor from A to B. The ATSO core team decide, right, are we doing a bidirectional down one side? Are we doing a unidirectional down one side? Or down both sides, sorry. What is the most effective facility that we think we can get in on that corridor with the necessary caveats? But really, we're looking at that from a perspective of how can we get the highest level of service possible, which 9 times out of 10 is segregation under cycle by design. And can we do it without the need for vesting or land take, which we realise is another risk? Now, that's not to say that land take investing is out, but we want to avoid it where we can. But naturally, routes that you can fit a cross section in will rise to the top in terms of not just quick wins, because there's lots of quick wins you can do with per facilities. It has to be the right type of scheme with the high level of service. So to date, there's about 20 or so of these packs that we've uh, done internally as part of the ATSO. So that's 5 schemes in each division across Northern Ireland. Um, at the minute, we're just waiting for final ministerial announcement of the active travel delivery plan before those are widely circulated. But I think it's been a really good process just to follow through. And you can see how, especially the pressy on the left-hand side, will continue through with the life cycle of the scheme. And will be a useful tool just for even the junior staff that may find themselves in that public consultation to have the pressy to hand to explain from concept through to detailed design of why we're doing this. It just gives us the opportunity to be ahead of the public a little bit, and hopefully be able to steer off some of the concerns that we might have there. Um, there are other bits and pieces that I won't talk at length on, but I'll mention them in case anyone wants to question. But we have been working with Dr. Lucy Saunders and Healthy Streets to bring in a Healthy Streets design check tool for Northern Ireland. And that is a tool that we will mandate within active travel delivery plan schemes and certainly ones that are on streets. Just as a check for designers, because as a consultant myself, usually what you do is go from A to B as efficiently as possible, but you don't always check the impact on the street as a whole. The healthy street design is just that check to understand, well, have you done what you need on this street to make it as healthy as possible? Healthy is basically a word to replace things like if you provided drop curbs where you should, have you got crossings at the right place? It's a very useful tool that makes you think about how a street actually functions rather than just getting a route from A to B along it. And the output from that healthy streets is a bit of a score. So you may be scoring a street, say 20 in the existing condition, and you've improved it to 40. But that's something tangible that when you're in those public consultations, you can say to someone that might be complaining about the active travel route that you're bringing down the front of their house. You can explain to them that there's this tool that we've put the route through, and actually we're showing that your street will be a nicer place. once this facility's in, it's not just about getting a cycle lane from A to B, it's also about trying to improve the street. So all those other things are ongoing in the background, and I think do lead into the whole this conversation about the engagement framework that we've tried to set up here. I've got two more slides. I just wanted to throw this one in here because I think it's quite interesting. So all that conversation we've had about the different programs and the plans that are ongoing, we realize that there's an opportunity there with data. We have data of schemes that are on the ground at the minute, schemes that are planned to go to ground, and schemes that are planned to go to ground in the future. What we did was we collated that data in the master program in the background, and effectively this is only showing the active travel delivery plan, the Belfast Cycle Network dashboard, but effectively all the schemes projected out to 2033 on that program with a quite a large and expansive spreadsheet in the background, but disseminate it into a dashboard so you can imagine for the key decision makers within DFI, something like this is much easier to see if you have to make a decision around funding. So it's the usual stuff that you used to see on the left-hand side. You've got your spend over the next few financial years, you've got your distance below. But the interesting part is we broke this down granular enough so we think we know what the projected programs are in terms of the design stages. So anything in light blue there is effectively the start of a scheme or the brief, and anything in dark blue is construction. You see, as you step through the program, your dark blue obviously starts to dominate more. In 2033, hopefully it doesn't look like that. Hopefully the dark blue is much smaller because there'll be more schemes coming through. What this allows us to do is just look at the program at any one stage and think, look, are we going to have a stage where we've got too many detailed designs? Do we have the capacity there? Is there a stage where there's too many schemes going out to construction? These type of things just help the conversations around contractor frameworks going forward, things like that, to try and help delivery. And the key thing here to say is these are just targets. They're not fixed outcomes. They're not promises to say we will deliver this. Everything that's came before will be accurate as the data behind it gets set up, but the future will always be a forecast. But it's just that little bit of using data to give you more intelligence to understand, is there something else needed in the future to plug gaps? So that's a piece of more of the program management side we've been looking at. And the final slide here I'll come on to is just more sort of a framing of what's next. So I really wanted to put that in here just to maybe frame some of the questions that might be coming in. But these are sort of our three key things we see going forward. So obviously, number one, drive delivery. Keep trying to drive that delivery to position the department in as advantageous a position as possible to try and deliver on that mandate under the Climate Change Act. Number two, strengthen design assurance. So we're moving to the stage now where these schemes are out and they are being designed. The APSO wants to act as a sort of custodian, not custodian of design, but the checker, I guess, in between. That's an interesting dynamic that will develop because, from my perspective, the other teams and the other sub consultants that are developing this, they're all technically sound. From my perspective, that needs to be light touch enough that it is sensible. But we do also want to get this level of consistency, and we do want to strive for the highest level of quality to move away from things like the shared paths to fully segregated facilities. And then third is just to build program resilience. So I think some of that's already been done. You'll see that what I neglected to mention earlier is the Belfast Cycle Network. I think the funding there is 100 million over the next 10 years up to 2031. Sorry, from the issue of that plan in 2021. But ultimately, there you can see, based on the mandate that we have now to spend that money, there's still a gap, which is where the active travel delivery plan fit in quite nicely. But that last slide that I just talked about then allows us to see is there something else that we might need to just plug that gap and give us a little bit of resilience in there. So it's been a really exciting 18 months working with Peter and the team. There's plenty more to talk about, so I might need to come back again, Hugh, but I think that's enough for today. So I'll finish there and look, happy to answer any questions that you might have.
No, that's great, Andrew. It sounds great, and sure, when you've built all of the 160 kilometers, we can have you back again and tell us, have a lessons learned session.